Hello, friends. Welcome to Synity's Platform Focus Series, where we discuss the capabilities, products, and modules that make up Synity's industry-leading enterprise data management solution, the Syniti Knowledge Platform. I'm Kevin Gulley, the head of product marketing at Syniti, and today we're going to be talking about the meat and potatoes of the SKP, our advanced data migration solution. To talk about ADM, which I like to say is simply the best enterprise data migration solution on the planet, period, I'm pleased to be joined today by Andy Lund, the Senior Product Manager at Syniti, who's responsible for the Syniti migration solutions. Thanks for joining me today, Andy.
Hi there, Kevin. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here to talk about the advanced data migration.
Hey, man, it's good to see you, and I'm happy to have you on board because obviously nobody knows more about this than you do from a product perspective and from a customer perspective. So I'm really excited to get your perspective on this. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about migration today and why Syniti's solution leads the market. So maybe you can start by giving us an overview or a definition from your seat about what the ADM is.
Yeah, well, let's just start. So data migration is never an easy thing. Every migration has its own kind of challenges. So one of the beauties of our kind of platform is that we basically turn the actual data migration process into, not just a technical challenge, we turn it into a full end-to-end business process. Mm-hmm. One of the things about a data migration project is the data migration team are the last to know about the requirements that are being defined by all the business process experts, but the migration team is the first team that has to be ready to load the test systems so that all that testing and the go live can happen. So that's kind of one of the biggest challenges. And I've been working on migration projects for 15 years or more. And my experience, and I've used many tools, the ADM is the most effective platform at ensuring consistency and success on projects.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because when it comes to that kind of success, the customers that we have at Syniti, come back to us over and over again as they do different migration projects over the course of their organization's lifespan. So from our customers' perspective, what sets ADM apart? Why do they love it so much? Why do they keep taking advantage of it and utilizing the Syniti solution?
Well, I think because our approach isn't just to focus on a ETL technical solution, we focus on it, our platform provides a business process. It means that we can sort of wrap around the roles and responsibilities of a project with all the requirements, with all that technical build, and we can put that into a single place where all the different stakeholders have visibility and access. So it just means that people feel in control, and importantly, customers also own that solution. That solution isn't comprised of, pure knowledge in consultant's head and hundreds of documents or functional specification, mapping documents. Our solution, all that intellectual property is in our solution. So it also means that customers own that solution and they can improve that solution and they're not reliant upon individuals. So that really builds resilience into all that process.
Right, sort of builds a knowledge base all in one location where everybody's participating. And sort of building the value over the course of the project, and then for future projects as well, I'm assuming.
And that's a very good point, Kevin. That knowledge that you acquire, when you're trying to understand the requirements of the future systems or the target systems, that knowledge is not just knowledge for the migration. That is knowledge that's required for the ongoing business, whether it be for data quality, for master data management. So with this, with the Syniti Knowledge Platform, we kind of use an advanced data migration project as also like a jumping on point to data governance initiatives. So that really gives additional value through the platform and to really support those other initiatives.
You talked briefly a moment ago about the idea that we sort of take advantage of a business process, turn a business, the migration into a business process exercise as well as a technical exercise. And I know that's one of the things that customers have spoken with me about and like about our product is that there's a lot of sort of components of that process. You want to just talk very briefly about sort of the steps that we sort of help make sure that people can walk through and give them all the support through with the technology?
Yeah, so in terms of like the high level steps, they're no real different to whether you're doing a project in ADM or a more traditional ETL method. Mm-hmm. So you have data extraction, profiling, designing the requirements of the target system, mapping, collecting data, transforming the data and loading the data. But kind of what I said before, what our platform does is it puts all of those steps in a single platform. So if someone, if someone's in a workshop defining what the requirements are, which fields and tables are needed for the customer master, for example, then that information there is used in a single place to support the mapping, to support the automation of the technical solution. So it's just basically all replaced in a single platform that's all integrated. And on top of that, we then have all the metrics in terms of how that process is running. How complete are we on the design and the field mapping? How much change has been happened this week? So it also helps give an empirical perspective on the status of the project. And the other thing that we really sort of strongly advocate is, before you even start a project, is just to really think about, the stakeholders, who's going to be working on the project, what are the roles and responsibilities, planning out kind of what are the key things that we need to achieve from a business case point of view, what systems are in scope, so that we basically bake that into that process to make sure people have the right access and to make sure reports can be distributed to the right people and segmented accordingly. And essentially to make sure that the return on the investment is supported through the platform.
Absolutely. And you were just talking about users, which is really important. And you talked a little bit before about the fact that obviously the business stakeholders inside of these projects are so important. The ADM solution and Syniti's Knowledge Platform does a lot more than just support the technical team in these types of projects. Can you talk a little bit about the types of users that can be supported and have roles inside of the migration projects with Syniti's?
Yeah, and it's a really good point, because although the technical build of that migration solution is a technical activity, but the requirements for that, whether it's about the definition of the requirements of the target system, of the future system to support the business processes, that knowledge needs to come from business SMEs or functional consultants that are designing that process.
Subject matter experts, yeah, SMEs.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The kind of the knowledge of where that data exists in the legacy systems, that needs to come from legacy system subject matter experts or from legacy IT people. So basically, by putting all those people together, around the platform, they can sort of give their input, and that input is fed directly into that technical solution.
Right, and so the business people aren't going to be overwhelmed with highly technical data mapping and migration specific database cables and whatnot to look at. They're going to have a different view of what they're trying to accomplish.
Exactly.
Things, identifying things, and then the technical people will be able to get into the areas that they really need to work on.
Yeah, and then on top of that, we have other stakeholders, whether it be project managers or program managers or executive sponsors. They're not really interested in that low-level detail. They just want to know, are things on track, based upon plan. Right. So on top of our suite, we also have dashboarding capability that basically gives different levels of granularity to understand how we're doing at a project level, at a work stream level, and then drill down into individual objects or systems. So it just gives a really good overview of kind of where we are against plan. We can also put in there different milestones, to sort of support stage gate criteria.
Love it. Now, we've been talking a lot about migration, like everybody knows what that is, but let's very briefly discuss the idea of, the key use cases that people really utilize a migration tool for. Why don't you talk through like what you would say the 2 or 3 top use cases are, business cases for data migration? Yeah,
so one of the big ones at the moment is customers moving from, for example, from ECC to S/4HANA. We have many customers that are on that journey.
SAP solutions, yeah.
Exactly. And there are different flavors of that. Some of these are more technical solutions that are almost like database transfers, but many businesses take the opportunity to include some business process transformation to make, to adapt their processes. So, the ADM is really geared for that. But also, we have more customers now moving to cloud-based platforms, whether it be Salesforce, Workday. So, our technology stack kind of supports all of those types of systems. And then another use case is really around like mergers and acquisitions. Historically, we've always been active in that space. But what we think is, particularly over the next year or two, there's going to be more merger and acquisition activity and divestitures. So our platform, many customers, leverage our platform to basically rapidly support those carve-outs or those movements onto new systems. And then finally, we have customers that basically have, you know, one client, for example, that I worked on over the last couple of years, they had 50 different SAP systems and a whole bunch of other legacy systems.
Ouch.
And their goal was to consolidate that down, you know, to 2 different SAP systems and then down to 1. You know, so that is, you know, it's a highly complex system, you know, global kind of projects that support, you know, huge business benefits, but a lot of you know, a lot of data transformation, but also a lot of business transformation. So, you know, this whole concept of turning that into the whole migration into a business process and building the knowledge into that really meant that that client in particular were able to, you know, run multiple projects in parallel and to really leverage, you know, the platform and to scale accordingly. So that was, you know, a great success.
Yeah, that's a big project. Let's talk quickly. I have one more question before we get into sort of the benefits, which I really want to talk about a little bit. But you know, when customers are thinking about deploying the Syniti Knowledge Platform, you know, with the data migration capabilities, what you know, I mean, it's obviously we talk about SKP as a cloud-based platform, but what should customers know about advanced data migration, deploying the solution? You know, what should they sort of be aware of, or what would their options be?
Yeah, so really, so the Syniti Knowledge Platform really has 2 components. It has a true cloud component called the knowledge tier. And that's where, you know, a lot of our sort of information governance capability is sort of based, the ability to sort of define rules, terms, policies, and to really support information governance activities. But then we have the stewardship tier, and that is really like the powerhouse for the execution of different initiatives, whether it be data quality, migration. So that platform is kind of a Windows-based platform that basically, you know, it can either sit within a customer's data center, it can sit within a customer's kind of cloud provider, or, you know, Syniti also provide options for basically hosting the full end-to-end stack. So we basically have a, you know, a model that customers can sort of choose what they want. And then we have, you know, lots of clients that sort of work in regulated environments. So we also support, you know, where needed, multi-tier environments, you know, development, quality, and production. And we have co-promotion tools and processes to support those processes.
Whatever the customers need to be able to make sure it's supporting their business requirements, which is a great thing to be able to shift over to talk about benefits a little bit. So, you know, the SKP obviously has thousands of success stories behind it, but I wanted to get your perspective on things, because I always try to break down, you know, benefits of using technology into 2 realms. You know, the first being the users, the second being the customers themselves, like the businesses themselves. So let's start with the users. From your perspective, are there key benefits that stand out when it comes to migration from the user's perspective?
I think you know, users that sort of use the ADM is, you know, regardless of what, you know, what object you're sort of developing, you have a consistent process. So, you know, your data design, you know, is always done in the same place. The mapping and the methodology behind the mapping is consistent wherever you go, not just on a particular project that you're working on, but basically every project, because, you know, within the product is inbuilt methodology, and all the training around that is consistent. So I think, you know, having that process means that the product is very familiar to, you know, to different consultants as they sort of move around, and it's very easy for people to kind of ramp up onto the project. I think also from a user perspective, kind of the ability to reuse. So, you know, if you're working on one wave and then you roll into a second wave, we have kind of the capability to kind of, you know, copy, you know, project elements to basically start up new projects from say a previous project. So that really helps kind of cut down the workload. And the other thing is, you know, in terms of like working in silos, because it's such an integrated system, it just means that, you know, you can have a more of a sort of a matrix sort of approach where consultants, you know, can sort of work across objects, you know, in a more consistent way, because things are built in the same way. Whereas many of the tools people use, you know, ETL tools, and they sort of develop their own solutions that, you know, don't necessarily follow a particular set of guiding principles and development approaches. So I think that's a big benefit.
Now let's just shift over to the company as the last topic. I mean, as an organization, we're obviously always focused on making sure we deliver value to our customers. But from your seat, what are the top benefits that companies get from working with Syniti on migration initiatives? You know, can you break that down into a couple of like key benefits?
Yeah, so I think one of the big benefits for me is kind of de-risking delivery, because you know you can onboard people, you can ramp up the process, embed that into a project much quicker. So that enables customers to sort of get quicker value from the platform.
Hmm.
That repeatability in terms of turning the process generation into a business process. Again, it means that you're not so heavily reliant upon people. You kind of retain that knowledge. And basically, there is case studies that Synergy has done to sort of partner with other sort of companies to sort of demonstrate the return on investment.
Hmm.
You buy the Syniti Knowledge Platform and the ADM, it will, your overall kind of return on your investment, it's proven. So people can have a lot of confidence in that. And I think the more as we integrate our migration capabilities with the ongoing governance, that just then really helps customers really gain additional value from these initiatives, and to springboard into additional, whether they want to take on data quality initiative or a master data management initiative. The platform really supports all of that.
Right. So therefore, the data transformation, the data migration projects become part of an overall larger data strategy for the enterprise, which can be utilized by taking advantage of the rest of the SKP. But when they're doing the migration, they're going to get the ROI, they're going to get the projects done quickly, they're going to be able to de-risk it, and then they're going to be able to go through the rest of their data journey by taking advantage of the rest of the capabilities in the SKP, and leverage the information that they put in during the migration project. So,
exactly.
well, listen, Andy, this has been great. I really appreciate your time today, and we're going to talk more as we get into some of the details of the modules or the features inside of the ADM over the next couple of months. But this has been a great overview, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Kevin. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
Likewise.